Two only, yeah?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here. It's my honor to be able to welcome you all, dear Minister, dear President, dear Deputy Secretary General, dear Mayor, dear ambassadors, distinguished guests. I'm very happy to be able to welcome you at this event, which is co-organized by the Congress, the City of Reykjavik, and the Association of Icelandic Local Authorities. Thank you for joining us physically in Reykjavik and online. Our gathering today takes place on the eve of the 4th Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Council of Europe member states. This summit has been convened in a Europe where war has returned and where democracy is backsliding. The aim of this summit is therefore to see our 46 member states recommit to the key values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights, and to the standards set, promoted, and protected by the Council of Europe. This summit's conclusions will also further support Ukraine and the victims of the Russian aggression. Now, beyond the official role the Congress will play this week during the summit, we were also very keen to have this side event for two reasons. Firstly, in a summit which centers around democracy, it is symbolically important that the two political assemblies representing citizens at the Council of Europe be present and visible to make their voice and the voice of the European citizens they represent heard. We are therefore thrilled that the Congress is meeting this morning and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is meeting this afternoon in Reykjavik. Secondly, we have been inspired by the Icelandic presidency, which did not want a summit where discussions would only take place within the walls of the Council of Europe or in capital cities. Iceland has pushed for an open, inclusive, and transparent summit where the voice of all relevant stakeholders would be heard. This is why we were more than happy to invite our colleagues and friends from the main European associations and institutions representing local and regional authorities. Having the opportunity to have all of you here today is a rare privilege. Thank you for being here. It was also key for us to have the youth represented, the youth delegates and the youth organizations, given how proactive the Congress is on youth. Thank you also very much for being here. Altogether, we will discuss how local and regional authorities must play their part in promoting and protecting human rights and how we must build strong and resilient democracies with youth as a driving force. We will end our event this morning by signing a call for action which will outline our shared vision of the role of grassroots authorities in making local democracy vibrant and resilient. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to our first speaker for this opening session, Minister Johansson, Minister of Infrastructure and also in charge of local and regional governments.
Was already on.
Was already on.
Yeah. Maybe if we turn them on.
Dear members of the Congress and other participants, it is a great honor for me to welcome you to Iceland and open your conference. I have twice had the pleasure of visiting the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities in Strasbourg and addressing you there. So it gives me a great pleasure to see this important gathering here in the capital of Iceland in Reykjavik. And actually, it's first time I've been in this hall. The local government level has an important place in my heart. Some decades ago, I took my first steps in politics in a local government in a relatively small municipality in the south of Iceland. And as many of us undoubtedly have in common, this desire to influence society came out of the blue, not least for me. I believe that politicians are like artists, because most of us have a vocation to the job, a vocation that, when it first appears, can surprise us. When I first raised my voice at a public meeting in my municipality, it was almost by accident. I had just come from a basketball practice with my friends and happened to walk into a community meeting in my village. I had grown up there, but had recently moved back after many years of studying abroad. Something in the speech of one of the leaders of the community made me want to speak up and make my opinion known. And after that, there was no turning back. Soon after, I joined the local council in the municipality, was there for 4 terms. I led it for some 7 years before I was voted for the Icelandic Parliament, where I have been sitting since 2009. And why am I talking about this now? Well, I would like to remind you of the importance of listening to your voice, following your calling. Each voice has an important role in the polyphonic discussion of society. And we, those of us here today, have all been blessed enough to listen to our voice and believe in it enough to let it be heard. And that's what democracy is about. The Council of Europe and its institutions have a rich and valuable history that has laid the foundation for dialogue between European nations, for progress, and most importantly, for human rights. In the more than 1100 years that have passed since people from Northern Europe settled here in Iceland, the relation between Iceland and Europe have been constant and strong. Iceland is a Nordic nation and a European nation, and those roots are much deeper than any official state association can interpret. Europe has a long and complicated history. However, what characterizes Europe most is diversity and democracy. And that's why we celebrate in Reykjavik today. That's why we think fondly of our friends in Ukraine who experience daily attacks that bring their nation both death and grief. Attacked by their neighbors and those who many considered brothers and sisters. In times like these, nothing is more valuable than the solidarity of democratic nations. Dear friends, I wish you success in your work here in Reykjavik and hope you will enjoy your stay as well in Iceland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the continuing dialogue we have established and we know will continue after the Icelandic presidency of the Council of Europe and after this summit. And let me praise your country again for the leadership it has shown in leading us to this summit. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to give the floor to the President of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe, Len Verbeek.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Dear Deputy Secretary, dear Minister, excuse me. Dear Minister, and dear Deputy Secretary General, dear Mayor, and dear representatives of European institutions and associations, and ladies and gentlemen, and especially also those high above on the balcony, you literally could be called our high-level guests. Very welcome in this meeting. Let me first express my most sincere gratitude to you, Mayor Eggertsson of the city of Reykjavik, as well as the Association of the Icelandic Local Authorities and its chair, Heida Björk Helmisdottir, for having co-organized this conference together with us. And let me also warmly thank Minister Johansson and Deputy Secretary General Birch for supporting our conference by their participation. Meeting here in Reykjavik today is highly important and symbolic, because Iceland is an example of both decentralization of powers and of leading local initiatives in the field of the environmental protection and energy transition. And also because we are 2 days away, as has been said, from the 4th summit of the Council of Europe, hosted by the Icelandic presidency of the Committee of Ministers. A 4th summit taking place 18 years since the previous one in Warsaw, in the context of a continent shaken by the war against Ukraine. In this regard, the 4th summit will be historical. It will allow member states not only to reaffirm their commitment to the values and missions of the Council of Europe, but also to strengthen their ties in the face of the large-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation and its subsequent expulsion from the organization. The summit will also serve as a starting point in the process of ensuring accountability for crimes committed in Ukraine with the creation of a register of damages. For the Congress, the summit will be double historic. Firstly, our political assembly was created by the first summit in Vienna in 1993, exactly 30 years ago, which considered that one of the bases of a democratic society is the existence of a solid and effective local and regional democracy. Endowing the Council of Europe an intergovernmental cooperation organization with a political assembly of local and regional authorities was courageous and visionary. As a result, today, some 130,000 local and regional authorities of our continent are represented by the Congress within the Council of Europe. And through them, the intergovernmental work carried out by the Council of Europe is firmly rooted in the life of local and regional communities. Today, local and regional authorities are an integral part of the system of checks and balances on our continent. And secondly, the 4th summit will be an opportunity to reaffirm support for the crucial role of local and regional democracy and embedding democratic values at the grassroots. We all, here in this room, know how much local and regional elected representatives contribute to underpinning democratic security in Europe. The multiple crises our continent has recently faced have shown everyone to how important the mitigating role is of local and regional levels in challenging times. And therefore, we are confident that the heads of states and the government will seize the opportunity of the 4th summit to express a strong, renewed commitment to grassroots democracy within a system of strong multi-level governance. The Congress has regularly contributed to the preparatory work for the summit and has adopted an ambitious recommendation in March. And through this active participation, we intend to encourage the member states to make greater use of the second political assembly within the Council of Europe and to make greater use of the huge asset represented by local and regional authorities in transmitting the work and values of the Council of Europe to the level closest to the citizens, to respond more efficiently to the democratic challenges our societies are facing. And we propose concrete action, such as the strengthening of the Congress assessment of the situation of local and regional democracy based on the European Charter on Local Self-Government, and also completed by regular work of observing local and regional elections, as well as the enhancement of activities on human rights. And this will be discussed further today in 2 sessions. Dear colleagues, let me stress that this work we propose to fulfill will be done together with you, the European associations and institutions of local and regional authorities, because you are our national partners in this common mission of embedding democracy at the grassroots. Later, at the end of the conference, we will sign a joint call for action which shows how deeply committed and linked we are in our work. I would like to warmly thank you all for being here today and sharing your views and perspectives with us, and eventually for signing this joint call together with us. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, President Verbeek, for giving us this historic perspective on this summit and also for sharing with us what the Congress and local and regional authorities expect from this summit. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to the Council of Europe Deputy Secretary General Björn Berg. Your presence here highlights the importance the Council of Europe gives to local and regional authorities. Mr. Berg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Minister of Infrastructure, President of Congress, Mayor of Reykjavik, representatives, distinguished guests, a very good morning to all of you. It's an honor and a pleasure to take part in this important event here in Reykjavik today at the very eve of a historic summit. For more than 7 decades, the Council of Europe has helped construct, almost stone by stone, a unique convention system and democratic institutions throughout Europe. The Court and a range of treaties and tools have helped transform the way we live, safeguarding our fundamental rights. But contrary to these positive developments we have seen over such a long period of time, we are today also facing the rise of an old ghost, aggressive nationalism, and a democratic backsliding all over our continent. Russia's totally unacceptable war of aggression against Ukraine has reminded us of just how important and fragile peace remains even in Europe. But extreme populism and nationalism can be found elsewhere on our continent as well, and it poses a clear threat to the future of our democratic societies. As also Mathieu referred to, that's why Europe's leaders are gathered here in Reykjavik. They are invited to recommit to the values and standards of this organization, the one that we protect and promote, and I believe we all share, and apply these to the challenges that Europeans face in their daily lives. Of course, it's the national governments that commit to treaties and standards. They also ratify our treaties, and governments are responsible for ensuring compliance. But national governments cannot achieve this alone. Local and regional authorities are not only closer to the people they represent, they are also responsible for delivering so many rights and services on which citizens depend, from schools and kindergartens to hospitals and clinics, to police services and crisis shelters. Local authorities are often also the first port of call for grassroots organizations, businesses, youth, individuals who need help and who wants to contribute to their communities. A reality that became very clear during the COVID-19 pandemic, where local services were so frequently the interface between people in need and the professionals and volunteers who provided it. Looking at the most likely outcome of the summit this week, what role will local and regional governments play in helping implement the decisions that are going to be taken here in Reykjavik? If you ask me, I believe local and regional authorities will be essential to meet almost every pledge and promise. Just let me give you a few examples. The summit is set to endorse a set of Reykjavik principles of democracy. Part of a much-needed response to democratic backsliding in many countries. These principles include holding free and fair elections, including those conducted by and for local and regional authorities. Local and regional authorities are already active in ensuring democratic participation with innovative ideas such as the Council of Cultures, a consultative body established by the former mayor of Palermo, Leoluca Orlando, and elected by migrants, providing them with a political voice and influence, and giving priority to the participation of young people in democratic life and decision-making, including through education. For this, the Council of Europe has elaborated its framework of competences for democratic culture, a very useful teaching tool. And the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities has produced a very helpful booklet for younger children, How to Make Your Town a Better Place, which the city of Metz in France uses as a tool for participation in the Children's Municipal Council. Initiatives like this are really important to equip young people and help them better understand their democracies. The summit will also underline the urgency of action on the environment to counter the triple crisis of pollution, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity. This will be impossible without all of us taking part. Transport, housing, waste disposal are among the policy areas often determined by local and regional authorities. As a matter of fact, many local communities are already driving change to deliver a safe, clean, and sustainable environment. Barcelona has created a network of green spaces and wildlife corridors. Munich has set itself a goal of becoming 100% reliant on renewable energy in 2 years' time. And Reykjavik, Mr. Mayor, which is hosting us this week, has done a lot as well and aims to be fully carbon neutral by the year 2040. And the city is now doing good work on investment in green infrastructure and social developments. Dear friends, the last issue that I want to mention here today is the situation that made the need for this summit so urgent and clear. And that's all about Ukraine, of course. Ukraine will no doubt be the #1 issue at this summit. And we must continue to do everything we can to support Ukraine. And together with you, we are already providing support covering a wide range of areas, from investigation of war crimes to assistance to Ukrainian law enforcement and the judiciary and local government. An extraordinary way in which local mayors, leaders, and administrators have stood up against Russian intimidation, often at real risk to their own safety, is a testament to their resolve. There is an obvious and urgent need to register and record all losses and damage resulting from grave human rights violations that have taken place in Ukraine as a consequence of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified full-scale military aggression. Preparations are therefore now being made so that the Council of Europe can play a leading role in setting up a registry of damage. And this will no doubt be a very important deliverable, if not the most important one, from the upcoming summit. What is clear is that without delivering justice, there cannot be any lasting peace. In support of the work now being done in Ukraine and throughout Europe at the local level, we all very much appreciate the role of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities that provides guidance and monitoring and helps share best practices about how to uphold our local democracies. Finally, we are indeed fortunate to have such determined, dedicated, and professional leaders and administrators in our towns and cities throughout Europe. 130,000 local and regional authorities throughout Europe. They make the world of difference to people's lives, and they do it every single day. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for reminding us of all the very concrete activities that are happening thanks to the work of the Council of Europe and the concrete activities that will come out of summits like this one. And I also want to pay tribute to the Congress mission that has just observed the local election this weekend in Albania. I want to pay tribute to the mission that will go to Norway next week to make sure that local and regional democracy is still on track. And also you mentioned Ukraine. We are also, of course, working very hard to make sure that despite martial law, there is some level of democracy at local level today in Ukraine, and of course we will be there after the war to make sure that the powers will go back to the mayors and president of Oblast after the war. Thank you very much for giving us this very concrete perspective. And now, to finish, I would like to give the floor to our host, the Mayor of Reykjavik, Mayor Eggertsson. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister of Infrastructure, President of the Congress, Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, dear participants. I'm very proud to host you here in the Reykjavik City Hall today in conjunction with the 4th Council of Europe Summit that starts tomorrow. As you see, we don't often use the City Hall very often for occasions like this. Pointed out by the minister, I hear that I have to invite him more often. But this is a house, a democratic house, built in the 80s. It was a competition with anonymous competitors and a very young couple, architects, around 25 years of age, won. They have later claimed that before this they only drew a garage, but I actually think that this house draws forward why they have been hugely successful as one of our best architects. Here you have the democratic part, open to the public with total transparency. You have the bureaucratic part in the other part of the building, and on the ground floor we have the Agora, one of the town squares where everyone can meet and even talk to the ducks at eye level. But this is a part of why I think that Reykjavik in Iceland is a perfect setting for this very important summit that takes place tomorrow and this week, but also for this meeting. We need a peaceful future in Europe, and we need a united Europe around peace and around the values that are the basis of the European Council: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine in February last year, of course, has taken over our hearts and minds and has had a major impact on the work of all international bodies. But this is not just an invasion and brutal war against Ukraine, it's also an attack on human rights, attack on our democratic values, and an attack on the rule of law. And for a nation of the size of Iceland, those fundaments are the basis of our mere existence. And it fills me with pride to see how Europe has responded, united politically, but also during Eurovision Song Contest this weekend, culturally. But I want to point out that we should not forget the cities and the local governments, the mayors of Ukraine have been critical for the first response, embracing their citizens under attack, rebuilding infrastructure in energy, schools, and other critical infrastructure. And as President Zelensky himself has pointed out, have been critical for the defense of the country. So, myself, I'm the first mayor of Reykjavik to have been raised in a suburb. And actually, the kids growing up in the neighborhood of Árbær never had the thought of entering politics at all. Politics were something for the men we saw during evening news on TV. So the city I grew up in was maybe not very outreaching to those young people. But we have learned a lot. And in Reykjavik, we put pride in working on human rights, working on democracy with our youth, with different groups in the city, with neighborhood councils where we have representatives from different neighborhoods. And we have been developing new ways of participation, an electronic platform called Better Reykjavik, where we have grassroots-fed ideas that can be discussed there, and have engaged, like when we made our educational policy, over 12,000 participants in the democratic process. Same goes for our annual budget participatory elections. We call it Our Neighborhood, where ideas from the neighborhoods themselves are up for vote and get financed through a voting mechanism on an electronic platform, now with 20% of the citizens over the age of 16 participating in the elections. That will be high numbers in some countries in local elections in general. So I think that we have a lot to share, but all those ideas and all those ways that we are using, we get them from elsewhere. We steal ideas with pride and enter into a discussion internationally on best practices. And that is one of the strengths of Europe and one of the strengths of the European Council. So it gives me real honor to host you here. I hope that we will have a fruitful morning, a fruitful week, and that Europe and the fundamental values we stand for will come out stronger. It fills me with immense pride that we will have democratic principles with Reykjavik names connected to it. And it will be our collective task in the city council, but in the city in general, to hold that flag up high and make you proud that you coined them with our city's name. Last but not least, I think we all need to show not only solidarity to Ukraine, but strength and perseverance. I think we will need to hold out for longer than we hope, but we will prevail, Ukraine will prevail. And don't forget cities when it comes to the rebuilding of Ukrainian cities. Don't forget the local communities and democratic processes in that endeavor. I think that our partners in Ukraine will step into the future with a new good and green country based on the very values that we cherish and are underlining here. So welcome to Reykjavik.
Thank you very much, Mayor Eggertsen. And indeed, we wish that Reykjavik will from now on be associated to some of the biggest democratic and human rights breakthrough, hopefully, that will come out of this week's summit. That would be a perfect tribute to your city. And before we go, maybe I leave this thought with you, if you haven't heard that yet. We've talked a lot about Ukraine, and President Zelensky himself refers to mayors, the local and regional level, as the second army in Ukraine, to show how important the local and regional level is in Ukraine in times of war. Thank you very much. We must now leave this table to the first panel that will start immediately. I've done a terrible job as a moderator. We're already 10 minutes late. I apologize. But please, first panel, come to the table. Thank you very much.
Distinguished guests, dear participants, dear panelists, it's my pleasure to host the first panel discussion we have after this impressive opening session. Thank you again for the introduction in this important topic. And first, I'd like to welcome members of the panel. So it's my pleasure to say welcome to Aline Adrian Nika, first Vice Chair of the Civics Commission, European Committee of the Regions. So welcome. And I also like to welcome Gunnar Helgesen, President of the Council of European Municipalities and Regions. Welcome. Also, Kees Logan, President of Conference of Peripheral and Maritime Regions. Rashid Madran, President of the Conference of Regional Legislative Assemblies of Europe, and also Jon Jakob Jonsson, former Congress Youth Delegate. I learned he has not to travel so far away from here in our small talk we had before the panel. So we are happy to benefit from your insights and input on a human rights-centered approach in local and regional governance, and that's the focus of our panel after the opening speeches. Now we will have a closer look on human rights and a human rights-centered approach in local and regional governments. And as always, on the local and regional level, we try to have a closer look. I'll go a little bit more into detail. Perhaps you have also some examples that would be really appreciated, to see what the local and regional level is doing with this topic. And sure, we are also very interested about a youth perspective on this topic. I think we will see it also in the next session, and I think it's also a very important topic all around the summit, so to integrate youth in politics. So for more than a decade, human rights protection and promotion at local level have been at the heart of the Congress activities, together, as you know, with the pillars of democracy and the rule of law. which are interdependent and interrelated. The role of the Congress in the development of local democracy as a foundation of strong, democratic, inclusive and sustainable societies is well recognized. And I should remind that the Congress promotes local democracy and good democratic governance, rooted in the principles of the European Charter of Local Self-Government, a very important tool for our work. However, an increasing role of local and regional authorities in protecting citizens' rights, in particular in the face of multiple crises, is still not that self-evident and needs to be explained further, both to the general public and to central authorities. Promoting human rights education and raising awareness among local elected representatives are an important part of the Congress activities, which should be continued and strengthened. This session on human rights will concentrate on the role of local and regional authorities in human rights protection and on the contribution of the Congress and European associations to promote and support this role and to stimulate the multi-level governance to effectively fulfill human rights. Adopting a bottom-up approach to defining human rights strategies and policies at the highest level and engaging local governments, communities and their leaders as partners can cement the political commitments of states, secure democratic stability, develop resilient, inclusive and peaceful societies, and thus help to prevent the atrocity of war in the future. The Congress human rights activities are mainly based on the principles of the European Convention on Human Rights, the revised European Social Charter, and the case law of the European Court of Human Rights related to the human rights decisions and actions at grassroots level. As judgments of the European Court of Human Rights demonstrate, local and regional authorities are directly responsible for protecting a wide range of civic, political, economic and social rights. As part of a Congress cooperation with the European Court of Human Rights, a study of the most violated provisions of the European Convention on Human Rights at local level will be prepared to lay ground for a program of Congress awareness-raising activities. It appears that the rights to property and to private and family life are frequently under breach. In addition, environmental cases have been examined by the court for many years and are likely to lead to an increase in environmental litigation before the court. Artificial intelligence cases may also give rise, sooner or later, to a new type of human rights jurisprudence. Strengthening preventive approach towards human rights through education and awareness raising of subnational authorities will lead to fewer human rights violations at local level and will contribute to the general execution of the court judgments. This is why the Congress recently decided to prepare a human rights strategy to streamline all the activities we are already doing, to streamline the Congress activities on human rights with the aim of increasing their effectiveness and impact. This strategy will build on the important achievements of the Congress in human rights protections. So Congress has already published a series of human rights handbooks from different topics, handbooks for local and regional authorities as a tool to enhance human rights education and raise awareness of human rights at local and regional level. So just after this short introduction, I'd like to invite the panelists to tell us about your organization, about your activities, about your promotion of human rights within the members of your associations. And as I said in the beginning, I would be really happy if we have some concrete examples, and we will have a possibility later on also to discuss questions and some aspects with the audience. So you are also invited after the first panel round. If you have any questions, please feel invited to ask questions or to contribute to this discussion. So thank you very much again for your participation in this panel. And now we will start with your presentations. And we'll be happy to give first the floor to Ali and Adrian Nika. As I already said, you are first Vice Chair for the CIVEX Commission, European Committee of Regions, I think everybody's informed about your curriculum vitae. You have a long experience in local and also regional politics as one of the youngest elected mayors in Romania. And so I think a lot of experience, and you can tell us about your personal experience, but also sure about the activities of the commission, the committee you are representing. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Foringer. It's a pleasure being here in Reykjavik, discussing about our fundamental values that our European Union is founded on, and not only because we are discussing these principles that are the foundation of our construction, political construction, but also I think it's very important that we bring on the importance of the local and regional level in fostering the spreading of these values at the local level, because we are in direct contact with the citizen. And I'm quite glad to see that we share, we, the Committee of the Regions, we share with the Congress these values and these, the importance of the local and regional level in promoting these values at the local level. And I think that these universal values are not meaningful if they are not exercised effectively. So if people do not exercise their rights, I think people might think that our society is only in a one-way direction. But actually, we have to encourage people to exercise their rights, to involve themselves in the life of the communities, in the life of their country, effectively and with concrete impact. And I think this is why this topic of human rights-centered approach at the local and regional level is quite important for the COR, for the Committee of the Regions. Because cities, towns, and other forms of local administration are part of the multi-level governance of fundamental rights. And we must note the key role that the local level has to promote equality, diversity, and fight discrimination, and building a more cohesive, inclusive, and respectful societies and communities. But how can we do that, actually? How can we go beyond beautiful sayings and beautiful words? How can a simple citizen understand the importance of these kind of values? Well, the answer is giving them tools at the local level so that the consultations that are taking place in different aspects of the local activity, in local policies, must be real, must be effective. Another tool is that we should promote more local dialogue and communication directly with the citizen. Transparency, of course, as Mr. Mayor spoke previously here. And indeed, the participatory decisions at local and regional level. Like a very good example that we heard this morning, the participatory budgets. I don't know if in many municipalities at EU level or in partner countries, this kind of participatory budgeting is on, but in my municipality, for example, it has a huge success. We managed to stir up the initiative of the citizens that before were not even consulted, were not questioned about what they really want to do in their municipality. So I think these are the tools that can make citizens engage more, make citizens aware of their rights and fight for them and share their true value, actually, and acknowledge their true value. Because we saw what happens with these values in Ukraine, in these kind of states that they don't put value on our principles, on our human rights. And I, coming from Romania, a former communist state, these reminiscence of those days where human rights meant nothing for the ruling party, for the ruling people in my country, it has even a more significance. Probably, I don't know, for an island like Iceland, the war on Ukraine and what I'm saying is something far away. But actually, this danger is lurking at our doorstep right now. So the spreading of autocracy in Europe, the spreading of extremist movements, and the spreading of populism is actually the greatest danger that Europe has faced since World War II. And that's the direction where responsible politicians, and especially those at the local and regional level, have to have a say to counterattack, to expose the populists, and to mitigate this risk, enormous risk that is threatening our democracies. Well, finally, I would like to say that we at the Committee of the Regions, we aim to pay tribute and to acknowledge those elected representatives, officials, and ordinary citizens who, despite the risks, live to make democracy work at local level by supporting better and more open communities through our Pavel Adamovich Award. I don't know how many of you know who Pavel Adamovich was. Maybe Jean-Luc knows because he used to be a colleague of mine in the Committee of the Regions. But Mr. Adamovich used to be the mayor of Gdansk in Poland, who was murdered 4 years ago, performing his duties. And it's a tribute to his work and legacy of our colleague and long-standing member of the Committee of the Regions. And it showcases that all of us must have a courage to safeguard fundamental rights and core European values in our everyday activities, both as elected representatives, but also as active citizens in our cities and regions. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now I'll give the floor to Gunn-Marit Helgesen. Gunn-Marit has also a long experience in local and regional politics. Gunn-Marit served as president of a Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities for a long time, and we have also close cooperation in the Congress. I have been president of Chamber of Regional Authorities, and Gunn-Marit was elected in 2022 as president of Council of European Municipalities and Regions, CMR. So you're responsible for all around Europe. And what about your experiences and what is your approach to human rights on local and regional level? Please, Gunn-Marit, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is an immense pleasure to be here today with all of you, talking about these very important issues and the role of local and regional authorities. And as you said, as president of the CMR, we are representing 130,000 local and regional authorities. It's a lot. And I think this is pretty large organization, and we do share the same value, and we do cooperate on almost every sector when it comes to politics. And since I'm also the president of the Norwegian Association, our local and regional authorities, I think I really know how huge impact local and regional politics and contribution is for our citizens. I think when we talk about democracy and human rights in Europe, I think we are all very concerned about backsliding democracy and we see also backsliding human rights. So both are under significant pressure, and I think we see it in several ways. One of the more alarming trends I would like to pay attention is the rise of hate speech. It targets specific groups and individuals based on their ethnicity, religion, age, gender, or sexual orientation. And it creates a chilling effect on the participation of people in politics, posing a direct threat to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Even in Norway, we see that people say no thank you to be re-elected because of hate speech. And this is really worrying. As an example, young politicians and women do not want to engage in politics. They drop out of their mandates because of the violent hate speech they face. A survey conducted in 2021 by the association Elus Localis found that 3/4 of respondents indicated that they have faced sexist remarks or behaviors. Over 1/4 considered abandoning politics due to harassment. Furthermore, local representation in politics can be difficult due to violence against local leaders. You mentioned the murder of the mayor in Gdansk. I would like to highlight here the violence from Russia against local elected representatives in Ukraine. Since the beginning of last year, Russian forces abducted 59 representatives of local self-government, 35 of whom were mayors, and Russian forces still hold 5. This is our colleagues, and we need to show solidarity. And the CMR, together with the Ukrainian Local Government Association, IUC, have been calling for their release since the beginning of the war. And I think we all have, but at least it shows we need to be show solidarity with the Ukrainian mayors and colleagues. That's why I'm so happy to be here today to join forces with all of us in order to join this call and ask for more power to local and regional leaders, a call to stop breaking democratic principles, which are the beating heart of Europe. Finally, we also, across Europe, see a decrease in trust towards politicians and institutions. Less trust makes political action less legitimate and challenges democratic processes. And we see this in lower voter turnout, combined with the rise of extremism and populism and anti-system parties. I perceive fall in the level of trust in our democracies as a fundamental problem. It should be our attention and action all over Europe. Local and regional governments, we are, as many already said, closest to the citizens. Citizens trust their local leaders. They trust their mayors. We see it also in Ukraine, how important the mayors are. It's my view that the right political level to respond to citizens' needs and expectations is local and regional authorities. Citizens are the cornerstone of democracy, and local governments have a crucial role in promoting and protecting human rights. Municipal decision makers can set a good example to communities through their actions. And respect for human rights and dignity is central to fostering constructive debate and upholding democracy. And I would like to, we can lead by example with zero tolerance to discrimination and hate speech. I know in Norway, in a decision, the Supreme Court stated that municipalities have an independent responsibility to protect and promote human rights. They have a duty to safeguard human rights in practice. I think we have to remind ourselves that this is the case, also at local level. It's not only national politics. So local and regional governments can boost civic engagement through promoting participatory democracy, as in participatory budgeting. And this allows citizens to decide on how to spend the tax money. And this is an effective way to organize and engage citizens in decision-making processes and promote their involvement in politics. Local and regional governments are also key to localize and implement Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals. OECD also acknowledged that the local level has an important role to play when it comes to implementing these SDGs. And we see that an impressive number of voluntary subnational reviews and voluntary local reviews from across Europe confirms the OECD's assumptions. Presented to the UN's SDG implementation monitoring mechanism, these reports of the years have given the opportunity to raise the voice and demonstrate the key role as well as the achievements made by local and regional governments in response to the current crisis. And SDG 11 on making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable is under review in this year. And we will again demonstrate the key role of local and regional governments in implementing SDGs and contributing to a world more respectful of human rights and democracy. In concluding, I would advocate for permanent mechanisms where politicians can hear citizens' voice directly, where citizens can take part in the decision process. And the Conference of the Future of Europe is a good example of co-creation between citizens and European political leaders. And this initiative could become permanent and expanded. In establishing such a mechanism, we can get a better understanding of needs and expectations of citizens and build trust in democratic institutions. So I'm so happy that we joined forces, and together we have a very strong voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gunn Marit. Now I'll give the floor to Kees Loggen. Kees Loggen is president of a conference of peripheral and maritime regions. There's also a lot of experience in different positions in North Holland, in the Netherlands. I think it's well known from the area of our president. You served in different positions in politics, also as a regional minister, and I'd like to invite you to tell us about your human rights approach, your experiences, and perhaps also some examples. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, dear colleagues. It's an honor to address this high-level political conference on embedding democratic values at grassroots level. As regional and local politicians, we all share the responsibility to defend and promote the democratic values within our communities that we represent. Human rights is one of the fundamental aspects that is embedded in our European societies, and it is our duty to ensure they are respected in our policy making. In our declaration, we acknowledge the many challenges we face both within Europe itself and on a global level. And I would like to highlight one of the challenges that I believe require immediate attention, and that is the climate and migration nexus. Regions are at the forefront of tackling climate change, especially in our coastal regions that I represent as president of the CPMR. Our duty is to protect the safety and well-being of our citizens and communities by implementing adaptation and mitigation measures and actions. But in addition, we need to be equipped to address the additional consequences of climate change, such as increase in the phenomenon of climate-induced migratory movements within and towards Europe. Local and regional authorities must therefore be recognized as key partner of national governance in addressing migratory flows, adopting a long-term vision and seeking sustainable solutions, including the transfer of our expertise and knowledge to improve the resilience of other regions in the world, vulnerable to the effects of climate change. With respect to migration policies in general, since regional and local authorities are the ones that are providing care and support for migrants on the ground, they should be involved in the development and implementing of migration, reception, and integration policies while respecting the dignity of the individuals. The extraordinary solidarity that our citizens have shown towards the war refugees from the Ukraine and the commitment of regional and local authorities to receiving, welcoming and integrating the peoples in need has all the more highlighted our crucial role in the field. As the EU main investment policy, the cohesion policy is essential in empowering regions to tackle these and other challenges we face. very importantly in this, it is to recognize the unique challenges faced by territories with geographical handicaps. For example, increased vulnerability to climate change and limited resources. The CPMR continues to lobby to maintain and improve the crucial EU policy that allows all regions, towns and cities to ensure the necessary social, economic and territorial cohesion that ultimately leads to the well-being of all our citizens. And at the same time, CPMR strives for a legitimized central role of regions in the implementing of the policy. And finally, we must keep stressing the importance of multi-level governments and working together to address the challenges and opportunities we face. Without this approach that brings together actors at all levels of government, strategies and policies can only fail. Let us keep working together to create a resilient, inclusive and peaceful society for us all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution. Now I'll give the floor to Rajit Madran, President of a Conference of Regional Legislative Assemblies of Europe, and also with long experience in different political positions. We had the possibility to talk about yesterday. You've been active in the Municipal Council as a Minister, Secretary of State, and so on, and also you're acting at the moment as President of Brussels Regional Parliament. So a lot of experience, and so my question is also what can you do in your organization and to promote and to protect human rights, and perhaps you also have some examples. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Mr. President, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be with you today as President of the Conference of European Regional Legislative Assembly, the CALRE, who representing 70 different regions and more than 2,000 million citizens. What is the role of Regional Legislative Assembly in the defense of human rights? Regional legislatures are political institutions. They have a crucial role to play. They have a clear vision of the reality of our region. They are composed of representatives elected by the citizen. They are therefore the guardians of democratic values and human rights. In their respective territories. As President of CALRE, I'm proud to say that our regional legislatures are truly working to ensure that human rights are respected in every corner of our regions. And we must continue to champion human rights in our region, promoting equality, diversity, social justice and individual freedoms. We must also ensure that the rights of vulnerable groups such minorities, refugees, migrants and people with physical, mental or social disabilities are fully respected and protected. We must work together to ensure that our regions, territories where human rights are respected and promoted, where dignity and diversity are valued, and where discrimination is not tolerated. This requires close cooperation between different regional institutions and actors, as well as an attentiveness to an active involvement of citizens. Human rights must be reflected for all MPs and indeed for all politicians in general. All policies must be examined in the light of respect for human rights as this span all the matters that concern us. As President of the CALRE, I undertake to continue to promote human rights in our regional legislatures, to encourage collaboration and the exchange of experiences between our regions in order to strengthen common action in favor of human rights. This could be reflected in the activities of some of the different working groups of the CALRE, such language and cultural diversity, migration policies, or the fight against gender-based violence, and we have also different other groups. To conclude, I also call on the regional MPs to exercise their role of monitoring and defending human rights with vigilance and determination. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Now I'll give the floor to Jon Jakob Johnsen, former Congress youth delegate. He's very active in social democracy. Was a youth delegate, unfortunately, during COVID, so no chance to travel and to meet the others. And yeah, you're also active in the Council of Young Social Democrats, so we are interested in your perspective on human rights, perhaps especially what's you thinking about? How do we protect human rights? Do you see some deficits? And perhaps how can we do better? So please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Council for granting me this opportunity to speak. The right to vote is fundamental to any democracy. It fosters community and enables people to engage directly in local politics. It is a human right. However, it is not granted to all. According to Eurostat, over 23 million non-EU nationals are living in the European Union right now. Unfortunately, most are given no say in electing their local leadership. If we are going to enhance participation at local and regional levels, I believe in granting everyone the opportunity to participate on an equal footing. The Convention on the Participation of Foreigners in Public Life at Local Level is a treaty adopted by the Council of Europe in 1992. It grants foreigners the right to vote in local elections, provided they fulfill the same legal requirements as citizens. As of today, the Convention has only been ratified by 9 members. Those include Albania, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. That means that in most of Europe, millions of people are unrepresented at a local level. I implore the rest of the 46 members of this Council to ratify the treaty, to build a more inclusive, democratic society where people's right to have a say in their local communities is respected across the continent. Not everyone in Europe considers themselves to be European, but Europe is still their home, so they are entitled to a voice. Furthermore, people's rights mean very little if they aren't made aware of them. Again, according to Eurostat, over 13 million people live in EU member states with the citizenship of another EU member state. The 1992 Maastricht Treaty imposed reciprocity inside the European Union concerning voting rights in local elections. That means these 13 million people have the right to vote in their local elections, but do they? In my experience, only some know of their rights to engage in local elections in the country of their residence, and even fewer feel welcome in doing so. A human rights-centered approach in local and regional governance must include educating voters on their rights and must encourage their participation. When I asked some of my friends from Poland, Spain, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan if they could name the mayor of Reykjavik, only one could. Most of them have lived in Reykjavik for years, but they have no idea who is in charge of their local government. When I asked them why they found it so difficult to engage in local politics, they said they felt their participation would not be welcome and that little was being done to encourage their involvement. It seemed to them that Icelandic politics was for Icelanders alone. I fear similar sentiments might be shared throughout much of Europe. To foster inclusive and participatory societies, local governments can better integrate immigrants by getting them to engage more in their local democracies, leading to a healthier, greater European community. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much also for your contribution. So we still have some time for discussion. I would like also to invite the audience. Yeah, if you have questions, please raise your hand. And I think we have some microphone here on the upper floor. Yeah, so please feel invited. Otherwise, I will start perhaps not with the second tour, yeah, perhaps looking at the time schedule, but just some questions, if it's okay, if you agree with it. First, I'd like to ask you, Gunmar. Yeah, you represent a lot of local authorities all over Europe. And we talk a lot about human rights, the awareness, everybody is responsible. But if you look, for example, at the daily life of a mayor, yeah, they have a lot of things to do. Yeah. Just to give you one example, yeah, I personally try to be here active in high-level politics, and just got a call from one of my journalists in my city. He didn't ask me, what about your activities here in the summit? He had a problem with some waste problem in an area of my city and how we can solve this. Yeah? So it's really down to earth, yeah? And it's a daily life of a mayor. And what is your impression? Are our mayors aware of the duty to protect human rights? And is there a necessity to do more in awareness raising, or perhaps also to support them?
Yeah, I think you are right. I think a lot of mayors are very into every aspect of daily life for their citizens. And I think we need to remind ourselves that we do have a responsibility also when it comes to human rights. Of course, it could be shown how we treat people in the daily life when they apply for something or need something in the school system, education, in the elderly homes and so on. Of course, it's all about human rights and how we treat people. But I don't think we think about it as human rights. And that's why I think the Congress do a very good thing when they make these handbooks for human rights. They show examples, we exchange experience and knowledge and so on. And I think we need to improve because it's too easy to talk about roads or taxes or elderly homes and so on. So actually we need to remind ourselves that human rights is the core value. And I really liked the speech from the youth delegates because we do need to involve youth in politics. We need to welcome them. They should feel welcome and then should be encouraged to go into politics. And I think we have a huge challenge, all of us, in order to welcome more youth people in politics.
So thank you. Perhaps I can ask also Jon. Yeah, you talked about also the awareness to encourage people, and my question would be, what can we do more in awareness raising? As you represent the youth, what do you see any possibilities? For example, if you look at the digital sphere, what about? Do you have any idea? How can we inform citizens? What can we do in awareness raising?
Well, I think the digital sphere is incredibly important in reaching out to the youth, but I think it's more important right now to focus a lot on cybersecurity. There's a lot of misinformation, and young people are very vulnerable to it because of their involvement in the digital space. So cybersecurity, I think, is a key element to combating misinformation and protecting our youth so they can be better informed and participate more actively in politics, because many youths have become disillusioned with the politics of the day. Many of them that I speak to don't believe that politicians can ever work for their interests. So combating that is, I think, should be one of our main objectives.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to Adrian about your introductory speech. You mentioned, for example, multi-level governance. That's so important. Also concerning the human rights approach. And now we just discussed what about the role of mayors and what about the question of awareness raising. But my question would be, if you look at I think normally everybody agrees in this room that it's a question of multi-level governance, and you also mentioned in former times the role of a state concerning human rights. But what should the role of a state be to support this multi-level governance approach? What support do we need to be more active in human rights protection and awareness raising?
Yes, well, actually, I would tackle an issue that Jon Jakob just mentioned it before. You cannot fully exercise your rights, your democratic rights, if you're not well informed. Because disinformation, malinformation, and misinformation can cause people to have different beliefs, to draw wrong conclusions, and for the stakeholders, for those who have the power to act, to take disastrous decisions. So the fight against disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation, the fight against propaganda, because we are all discussing about that nowadays in this digital warfare accompanying the war on Ukraine. This fight, I think, has to have some tools. We have to equip our citizens and our officials with tools to fight disinformation. And the state can better regulate the online environment, because we have the social networks that are thriving with fake news. By the way, we say fake news. When we say fake news, is actually a decreasing of the level of gravity, of seriousness of what it actually is, a lie. The proliferation of lies or pieces of truth decontextualized that try to inspire to the citizen the exact opposite of what it actually is. So we need this kind of regulation in the digital environment so that people feel safe in this environment. And also we have another threat, the AI, the artificial intelligence. We saw that it can accelerate disinformation with deep fake activities and all this simulation of voices and even images that can misinform the citizen. And I think local and regional authorities have a role to play in debunking the propaganda and misinformation through, I already gave you some examples in my opening speech, but I will also give you another 3 examples. Through civic education. So training the media professionals to distinguish between fake and non-fake information. Also strengthening democratic practices at local level, at the local administration, so that we can induce into the population the sense of democracy at all levels, in all aspects of the life. And lastly but not least, intensifying, of course, the dialogue with the citizens and exposing the populists and those who are spreading these fake news. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps having a look on regulation, I'd like to ask Rashid Madran, as the president of Conference of Regional Legislative Assemblies of Europe. Yeah, if you look at the regional level, do you have the possibilities to provide such rules, legislation? Do you need, especially the national level? Or perhaps can you tell us a little bit about your experience and just if I refer to your speech before, yeah, you talked about minorities, diversity. And I think that's also a question about communication. If you look at social media sometimes, what really difficult perspectives we see on these topics. So I think it's a question that's really relevant to each level, if you look at this multi-level.
Je vais parler en français, mais vous allez le traduire. Alors, première chose que je voulais dire, c'est que je vais prendre l'exemple de Bruxelles. Bruxelles, c'est une ville de 184 nationalités différentes qui coexistent sur ce territoire, et on y parle plus de 100 langues.
I will speak French. I will start by giving the example of Brussels. Brussels brings together 184 different nationalities and 100 different languages are spoken.
Donc c'est probablement la ville européenne la plus cosmopolite du monde, après Dubaï, mais Dubaï pour d'autres raisons.
It's probably the most cosmopolitan European city in the world, after Dubai, but Dubai probably for other reasons.
Et donc, la gestion des minorités, de la diversité, c'est quelque chose que nous avons l'habitude de faire.
So managing diversity and minorities is something that we're quite used to.
Mais ces derniers temps, nous avons vécu une crise très difficile à Bruxelles, avec un afflux massif de réfugiés en provenance d'Afghanistan, de Syrie, d'ailleurs et d'Ukraine.
But in recent times, we've experienced a really serious and difficult crisis with a massive arrival of refugees from Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine and elsewhere.
Et les autorités fédérales, donc l'État central, n'a pas pris ses responsabilités. Et donc ce sont les municipalités et les régions qui ont dû trouver des solutions, notamment d'hébergement.
So, unfortunately, the federal authorities did not play their part, and it fell on the local and regional authorities to find housing solutions in particular.
Et puis, il s'est passé quelque chose d'assez emblématique à Bruxelles, capitale de l'Europe, siège de l'OTAN, c'est que la population, comme je l'ai dit, qui est très différente, a considéré qu'à Bruxelles, mais pas qu'à Bruxelles, on peut parler au niveau européen, et je le dis comme je le pense, parce que ça s'est dit, qu'il y a eu une différence de traitement dans l'accueil des réfugiés en fonction du pays dans lequel ils venaient et des crises qu'ils vivaient.
In the European capital, that is Brussels, that hosts an organization like NATO, for instance, something happened, and I'm going to express it because it was said, and that is that people in Brussels felt that refugees had not been welcomed in the same way, depending on what country they came from.
Et donc ça a beaucoup interpellé le monde politique, le monde associatif et les ONG.
So the political sphere, the associations and NGOs, of course, felt really compelled to react.
Et alors que le monde politique était inquiet, on s'est rendu compte que la population était beaucoup plus généreuse que le monde politique et que les décideurs.
So the political world was quite worried about the situation, but we realized that the people, they were much more generous than decision makers.
Pourquoi je vous parle de ça? Pour revenir à un exemple très concret où je ne sais pas comment c'est en Islande, je ne sais pas comment est la situation dans d'autres pays, mais en tout cas pour la Belgique et pour ce que je connais les pays environnants, on peut globalement dire aujourd'hui que la démocratie représentative vit une crise de confiance majeure.
Why am I saying this? To come back to a very practical example. I don't know what the situation is in Iceland or in other countries, but in Belgium, we feel that representative democracy is experiencing a major crisis.
Et donc on a réfléchi en Belgique et notamment à Bruxelles sur comment est-ce qu'on peut, nous, et je rejoins ce qui a été dit par le représentant des jeunes, comment est-ce qu'on peut améliorer la participation de nos concitoyens dans le processus de décision.
So therefore, in Belgium, and in particular in Brussels, we thought about ways of improving the participation of our citizens in the decision-making process.
À côté de la démocratie représentative, avec des élus qui sont élus à des fréquences régulières, aujourd'hui, on constate que les citoyens ne veulent plus être consultés une fois tous les 5 ans, et puis entre eux, il ne se passe plus rien.
In addition to representative democracy with elected representatives, we've noticed that citizens no longer just want to be consulted every 5 years and nothing happens in between.
Et donc nous avons mis en place un dispositif qui s'appelle, à Bruxelles, d'ailleurs qui a été repris parmi, je le dis avec beaucoup d'humilité, hein, mais qui a été repris par l'OCDE comme un des modèles les plus inspirants ces dernières années en termes de gouvernance. Nous avons créé ce qu'on appelle les commissions délibératives mixtes. C'est quoi les commissions délibératives mixtes? Ce sont des députés élus qui font partie de commissions permanentes et nous tirons au sort 45 citoyens qui participent avec les députés à ces commissions délibératives et ils font des propositions au Parlement et au gouvernement.
So what we have done in Brussels is set up what we call mixed deliberation committees. And I would like to, refer to the fact that the OECD found that that was an inspiring form of governance. What it means is that in these committees you have members of parliament who are members of standing committees, plus we draw by lots 45 citizens who will submit proposals to the government.
Et pourquoi je parle de ça? Et je rebondis par rapport à la participation, parce que pour être tiré au sort, il n'y a ni condition de nationalité, il faut avoir 16 ans, peu importe de quel pays vous venez, l'important c'est de résider à Bruxelles pendant au minimum 5 ans. Il me semble que c'est une des pistes qui permettrait d'augmenter la participation des jeunes, des citoyens, peu importe l'origine et peu importe le pays d'où ils viennent.
Why do I say this? It's because, in fact, to be allowed to be drawn by lot, you have very few conditions. No condition of nationality. You have to be above the age of 16, and you have to have lived in Brussels for 5 years at least. That's all. So I think it could be one avenue to explore to improve the participation of young people.
Voilà.
Well, thank you very much. If I may stick to the topic also concerning migration and especially the peripheral regions, the peripheral and maritime regions are especially affected by migration. Everybody knows about it, and I think every citizen sees it in the daily news. What about the situation and the peripheral areas? And Kees Logan, you just mentioned this point, and you have a lot of expertise. And if we talk about multi-level governance, perhaps you can tell us about is your expertise asked by national governments, even on a European level? And because that's really one point of human rights, migration, the situation we see in different ways of welcoming refugees. So what's your experience, and perhaps how can we do better? Please.
Well, I'm not very positive about using the expertise in the field on this topic. We were at the conference of the future of Europe, where we tried to talk about the climate refugee who is coming to our shores, if we want it or not. And you cannot blame people who are escaping the horrible circumstance that climate change brings for their regions. So you cannot blame the people who try to come. But what we can blame is that we have the knowledge and the expertise within our borders to help them over there to prevent them from coming, and that not by harsh regulation, but by giving the technology, the expertise to survive on their own, in their own region. And because it is not a jurisdictional term, a legislative term, refugee, climate refugee, it was very difficult to address that during the conference of the future of Europe. And I think that if we keep on ignoring these future problems, we still can experience them, but we are not then prepared yet for them. So my call is always, let us aware that climate change is there, that it is not only the weather that is changing, but also our refugee flows. The UN predicted that between 80 and 200 million people will be on the move due to climate change within the next 20 to 50 years. We only experience a fraction right now in Europe, and we have it very difficult to handle that. So the challenge for the future is immense. And I'm convinced that it should be a tremendous help if we are willing to extend our technologies, our experience, to the regions there who are in this dire need of this technology and help. Yes, it costs, it costs now, but it will be a fraction of the cost in the future when these people are really on the move and are on our borders waiting to come in. So I once again call upon us all, let us not wait till the disaster is happening, because it is happening right now, but also extend a hand and exchange our knowledge and our experience with the regions over there.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your contribution. Looking at the time, I think we are exactly within our 1 hour we have planned to discuss. Thank you very much for your important contributions and also for answering the questions. I think just to summarize a little bit, I think we've seen, if we talk about this human rights-centered approach in local and regional governments, that we already do a lot. Yeah, it's daily life, and perhaps just you mentioned it. Perhaps not everybody is always aware, but local politicians, regional politicians, and also people in administrations, they are working on human rights. Yeah, because it's a daily topics. Yeah, but it's work on human rights. But nevertheless, I think it's necessary just to work on this topic about awareness rising. Yeah, and because it's one of the very important tasks of local and regional level, and we heard a lot of examples. Thank you very much to being so concrete, yeah, to providing us with examples, best practice, and so that's why always on local and regional level we can learn from each other. And as the mayor from Reykjavik said, it's possible to copy. Also, the mayor of Munich was very famous in Germany. He always said it's a good thing in local politics. Yeah, you can copy. It's not only allowed; we wish to copy. Yeah, and so that's I think that's a special point on this. And we saw some examples that there's still some potential in growing, looking at multi-level governance. Yeah. There's a lot of expertise, and I think it's necessary to involve this expertise to strengthen our societies, because these are really big challenges, disasters sometimes. And sure, we should use all the possibilities we have, new technology, but also looking at the risk, looking at cybersecurity. And we also got very good examples concerning participation, and I think that's a very, very important way to involve citizens, to work together with them to protect their human rights. And so thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. And if I got the program correctly, now we have time for a coffee break. That's correct. 10 minutes over. Now we've been so fast. 10 minutes coffee break. So thank you very much for this panel. Thank you.
titled Building Strong and Inclusive Democracies with Youth as the Driving Force for Change. If we want to achieve the strong and inclusive democracies, we have to have everyone on board to be involved in our local community. A key group in this endeavor is our youth. Young people are not only impacted by current policies or the lack thereof, today's young people will also be generation to succeed us. They will build further on the foundations we are leaving them with. To discuss this, we have the honor to have with us today Peter van Hoch, Vice President of the Association of European Border Regions, Jean-Luc Van Rees, Vice President of the Assembly of European Regions, Elias Drey, Vice President of the European Youth Forum, and sorry, I just skipped over, Alice Bergholz, Vice Chairperson of the Advisory Council of Youth of the Council of Europe, and we have with us a youth delegate, Remingus Sepial, Congress youth delegate, as I mentioned. Before our panelists will share their views on the question, are young people today still demanding the same changes than we once were asking for? And if so, why haven't we been able to implement them? I would like to mention that the Congress has been a strong supporter of empowering youth by including them in decision-making processes and by promoting youth participation. He is calling for continued efforts on this in its contribution to the 4th Summit of Heads of State Government, which takes place here in Reykjavik the next 2 days, as we heard earlier this morning already. The Congress, in fact, has been a pioneer in this field within the Council of Europe as the first body to structurally include young people in its work via our Rejuvenating Politics program, and this enabled youth delegates for all of our member states taking part in our statutory meetings since 2014. Well, we all in the room are part of one of the first generations that had the privilege of growing up in a society that called itself democratic, and over the past decades we have come a long way in strengthening democracy, developing participatory processes, and creating inclusive towns, cities, and regions. But this doesn't seem to be a one-way street. Today, anti-democratic forces are rearing their head. Our societies are increasingly getting more and more polarized, and war, as we all know, in the Ukraine has returned in Europe. Moreover, there is an economic crisis. Inflation is the topic of the day, and still we will have to deal with climate change and its consequences. So there are many challenges breaking down on us and on our youth. That is why I would like us to focus on how we can work towards building stronger and more inclusive communities to leave behind for future generations, and how we can give young people tools to be forces of change in building this future together with us. We are very interested, I think, now to hear from our statements from our panelists and the questions they are posing into their center of view. And I will give the floor now to Mr. Peter van Hoch, and we are very interested to hear from your opinion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sonderegger. Dear distinguished attendees, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to be here today representing the Association of European Border Regions, the AEBR. I'm Vice President of the AEBR and in daily life Regional Minister of the province of Gelderland in the Netherlands. The AEBR has been working over 50 years to improve cross-border cooperation. And this is important as more than 40% of Europeans live in border regions. Border regions are the laboratories of European integration. and the border region should be a meeting place for young and old, making our democracies more diverse, tolerant, and solidary. The ABR has more than 100 member regions. It represents internal and external European border regions from Lapland to Greece, from Ireland to Ukraine. And although there are great geographical differences, we need to help each other in our common challenges. Residents of border regions experience the border in everyday life, while national governments pay foremost attention to their own territories, and the capital in practice is often far away from the border. Here, regional and local governments can play a crucial role. At the regional and local level, the contacts between neighboring countries are often much better because people know each other. They face the same challenges. They understand the need to establish cooperation. For instance, emergency services or easily use of public transport across the border. In cross-border cooperation, youth is a driving force for change. Young people are inclined to look beyond borders and take new paths. As governments, we do have a responsibility to help young people. I will give you a real-life example in my own region, Gelderland, which is considered as an open border region. A young man from Romania signed a job contract to work in the Netherlands. When he arrived, it turned out a lot different than he expected. He was put up in an accommodation in Germany and was transported daily to his work in the Netherlands. Faced with unknown rights, two different and for him foreign legal systems, his employer took advantage of him, selling him short on wages. Yes? The young man had to live in a tiny place which he had to share with some other people. And on top of that, he had to pay highly unfair prices for transportation to work and for his accommodation. This small example shows that for building democratic values in Europe, cross-border cooperation is critical. Border regions are on the grassroots where the rights and well-being of young people are challenged and need to be guarded by the local and regional authorities. In order to do so, we as regional government implemented border information points in the Dutch-German border region. Independent information points for cross-border workers, familiar with the languages, the cultures, and the regulations of the neighboring countries. They offer information on taxes, social insurance, and labor law. Such initiatives can make a big difference for young people in border regions. As a final remark, I would like to emphasize that all major challenges we face today are global and interconnected. That's why the AEBR is collaborating with other organizations, for instance, the Cohesion Alliance. Let's not forget the grassroots level. Strong and inclusive democracies start at the local and regional level. We need to concentrate on tangible improvements for individuals rather than grand visions. Let's work together to create a brighter future for everyone, starting with small but meaningful changes we can make in our own communities. And let's continue to support and encourage youth in their efforts towards more integrated, tolerant, and solidary Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for, especially for your concrete example about cross-border cooperation. And I think, as you mentioned, a big part of Europe's regions are living on a border and are confronted with border discussions and border problems. And thank you for your contribution. And now I have the honor to give the floor to Jean-Luc Van Rees, the Vice President of the Assembly of European Regions. Jean-Luc, the floor is yours. Maybe you take Peter's microphone because it worked before? Yes, okay, this one should work.
So here you can speak when you have a red light. It's good?
Yeah.
It's special. So, good morning, colleagues. I'm honored to address you as Vice President of the Assembly of European Regions. And I will begin by giving you good news. I think the good news is that I think that actually democracy and living in a democracy, that's a part of our social instinct. And I'll give you an example of that. About a long time ago, 22 years ago, I became president of a small community parliament. And together with my staff, we decided to create an educational program for the youngsters. Learning democracy, and we invited the schools to do so. And it began with youngsters from 6 years old. And you would ask me the question, what are you doing with youngsters and learning them about democracy when they are 6 years old? That's not what we think about educational programs. Well, what we did is putting together this one class, 20 youngsters, and we asked them a simple question. Well, we should do some activities today, and we have a choice between two activities. We can go and see a movie, or maybe we can do some sports. But you have to decide. And then you give them 15 minutes, half an hour to decide. And what happens? The children begin to speak, to discuss. I want to do that, I want to do that. And after 15 minutes, there is somebody saying, well, maybe we should do what most of us like to do. And so they reach an agreement. And the agreement is what most of the kids want to do. So there is no power play in that. Just youngsters, 5, 6 years, they exchange their ideas, and then they take a decision. And the first decision they take is to say, well, okay, we do what the majority wants to do. So I think we have to be positive because the democratic feeling is something we, all human beings, we have in us. Problems, of course, occur after 6, 7 years. Then we have manipulation, we have a lot of things we could discuss, but we are not in a psychology course here. But I think this is a very important starting point. Very important starting point of what we as parliaments should do too is being a partner in this educational process of our youngsters, and we sometimes forget this. It's easy to say it's up to the parents, it's up to the schools, they have to create good citizens with democratic beliefs. No, we as a parliament, we as parliaments, we should do the same thing. And what's important in that is that, first of all, it has been said by Rashid before, we have a completely new society. It's one of the questions asked here. When I was a youngster, I lived in a town which was a big provincial town, which was Brussels. You had two communities, and there was a kind of discussion going on between the French-speaking and the Dutch-speaking. Those two communities now are more than 130 communities. Did we, as lawmakers, adapt to that new situation? there's a lot of migration. I was confronted directly to a lot of people coming in from migration who came from countries where they didn't know what it was to live in a democracy. You have to learn to live in a democracy. Did we do the last 2 generations that effort? I'm afraid the answer is negative. Can we claim to the parents who themselves came in our country and did not know what it is to live in a democracy? So is it their task to learn to their kids what they don't know? No, it isn't. So I think there we have an important task, and it begins by helping youngsters to show them that they have talents. Because if you don't give self-consciousness to youngsters, if you don't tell them they have talents, they will never think they belong to an active society. And there again, I think we made mistakes. So when I see the first question asked to us here in this discussion today, are young people today still demanding the same changes? My first answer is, did all youngsters express, are our youngsters capable of expressing their demand? And of course, being a member of Assembly of European Regions, we have since 30, 40 years an enormous expertise in the matter. We have exchange programs, we have between younger people, we have also professional exchange skill programs, which is very good, but this is about learned youngsters. It's not about all the others. And I think the main thing we have to do is to up-level those other youngsters to learn them to express their talent and to express what they think. And if we don't achieve this, I think it will be very difficult to have a good democracy for the next generations. What do we do? What are the tools for that? I gave some already. It's educational, of course, but then we should think about changing our decision-making system. We live in a world, it has been said before, where you have opinions. Aline and I, last week, Aline and Adrian, we were in this meeting last week where they spoke about fake news. There are more than, 30,000 fake news websites existing. And those websites, some of them are encrypted. So when somebody on these websites expresses fake news, there is no way to reply to it. Before it was quite simple. In each country you had about 10 newspapers and, well, you could reply to the newspapers and it's quite simple. No, it is not like this anymore. What are our tools to reply to this false information, those lies, which are expressed all over the world? We have a justice which is a very slow justice. Being a lawyer myself, criminal law is very slow all over Europe because there is a right of defense. I'm the first to defend this right of defense, but it is not quick enough. And if you don't have a good working judicial system, you don't have a good working democracy. One of the pillars of this democracy is having a good working judicial system. So I think when we speak about giving the word to the youngsters, thinking about new generations, we first have to think about how could we make our own existing tools more flexible and more adapted to modern society. So that's, in short, what I wanted to say. But I think we are there to serve. We have to communicate, and especially with the youngsters, we have to exchange expertise. They are the ones who better know the new techniques than we, and we just can offer to them the past experiences of things that worked before and maybe could be used in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. I think you raised some very interesting topics, communication and exchange of expertise in the question of what is the idea of majority, the idea of democracy in a way, and also that you raised a topic about youth with migration background and how to implement and welcome them in our system thinking, and maybe that we have to overthink this system so far. Thank you very much for your contribution, and we now come to the contribution of Ms. Alice Bergholz, Vice Chairperson of the Advisory Council on Youth of the Council of Europe. Alice, the floor is yours.
There we go. Thank you so much. Thank you all for inviting me here today, and it's truly a pleasure to sit and talk on a panel amongst friends, because that's definitely the impression that I get from just hearing those speaking before me. I want to start by just saying that on a general level, there is a divide between young people and politics, despite events like these. And to start off, let me just specify a couple of the different challenges that this generation of young people are facing that previous generation didn't in the same capacity. So first of all, I mean, it's been said before, we have seen an escalation of crisis in the last couple of years. But what that means for traditional young issues, like lack of housing, unemployment, access to quality education, that has sort of become old news, because now the whole world is focused on health crisis, democratic backsliding, war, full scale in Europe. We see these new realities where young people are stuck, really, and need politicians to take active and concrete steps to address its root causes. Because I was thinking, preparing for this, what does it mean to be young? Well, really, to be young means that you lack reference points from previous experiences, right? So the idea is that you grow up, you gain experiences, and you gradually lose your youth. At least that's the idea of how it's supposed to happen, right? So each generation will grow up with a new set of understandings of the world and how it functions. And that also means that the generations that are growing up now, who are, for example, going through a digitalized society, they have a completely different understanding of how to learn about that society, and then are basically interacting with it while being prepared for life as citizens. And this has also influenced how young people practice politics, because a lot of young people channel their engagement in different ways. They focus on long-term sustainability, they have future-oriented impact in the center, but they still want to express it in the here and the now. And I think Fridays for Future is a very popular example of this. But they are not heard in this context to the right amount, because they also have the right to be listened to with their voices and to influence the decisions that are taken on the future that is then left for them to govern. So looking at the definitions of how we see political participation, it's very old. And most young people are what is traditionally called unorganized, and that only means that they lack an affiliation to an organization. It doesn't mean that they don't care. Many young people are highly interested and committed to defending a free and just Europe, but they're just not fitting into the categories of what we see as engaged. In our political system, then, youth is a dramatically underrepresented group. There's a relatively small number of young people who choose to engage in political parties or run for elections. But there are very few options then that remain for those of us who don't want a party affiliation, but still want to be committed to defending democracy and human rights. So what happens when we don't get seats at the decision-making tables around Europe? 50 years ago, the Council of Europe launched this revolutionary tool called the co-management system. And that's when the Advisory Council started its work in the co-management, where we make decisions together. And this is a brilliant structure, but it's not enough. So for democratic systems to stay stable, they need young people as their allies. And young people won't defend institutions that they don't know about. And decisions that are made without youth endorsement are really only temporary solutions. So if we want young people to be a driving force for inclusive democracies, we need to understand the implications of these shifts that are happening between the generations. And otherwise, we are risking completely missing large groups of the European population when we make our decisions. And we have to acknowledge that we all have different experiences, depending on the perspectives and the realities that we come from. I do note that I am the second female speaking on the panel today, after President Helgason. And I think that's also a perspective that needs to be acknowledged. And I think I speak for the whole Advisory Council when I say that I applaud the Congress for being able to have discussions like this and to also look at how to systematically battle underrepresentation of different types of groups. Now, finally, I will just want to say that the key here, I think, is to implement actions for intergenerational dialogue. Because things that are happening in the youth world and in the political world need to sync and coexist together. And the Council of Europe has a brilliant practice of looking at young people not as beneficiaries, but as partners. I will close just quickly with a quote from Hannah Arendt. She said that it's in the very nature of the human condition that each new generation grows up in an old world. So that we prepare the new generation for a new world would only mean that one wishes to strike it from the newcomer's hands, their own chance at the new. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice, for your contribution. And I think it is very important that we keep in the eye that there is a divide between young people and politics, as you mentioned in the beginning, and that our youth is growing up in a digital life society, which is quite different to the society we were growing up in our days when we were young. And still, I think the outlook that we have to be, and to be able to give the youth the place for dialogue and the place and the chance that they will have their future on their own and that they will have to manage with their future. Thank you for this contribution. And now I have the honor to give the word to Mr. Elias Stray, the Vice President of the European Youth Forum. Elias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Alice, for your intervention. I hope I won't be repetitive because I agree with everything you've said. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Congress for the kind invitation and for seeing the youth, just like Alice said, not as a topic, but as a real stakeholder. The European Youth Forum, that you may know, is the democratic representation for over 100 youth organization, national and European. So I'm coming to tell you about their desires, but also about the reality of youth and of young people. Because no matter the generation, young people have always faced specific challenges. I can quote the entry into the labor market, having a decent salary to live in dignity, access to fundamental rights, living in a world free of discriminations, free of racism, and of course being listened, but not just listened, integrated within decision-making processes and public life. I'm not telling you anything new. Every new young generation must face these obstacles, and unless I am mistaken, everyone in this room has been young at least once. So you fully understand what I mean when I'm saying that every generation has its own challenges. But indeed, there are some concerns that are specific to today's young people. The prevalence of unpaid internships, for instance, leading young people to live in precarity, and the consequences of the climate crisis, which we have to live with, which are also threatening our common and our human future. And unfortunately, I'm again not telling you anything new, but in many countries, democracy is backsliding. It is challenged, it is abused, whether by the states or by its citizens. And many other, shall I say, evils are also coming back to the surface with this, right? Xenophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, LGBTQ hatred, anti-Muslim hatred, conspiracy theories, history relativization, hate speech, and all of it is also happening online in the digitalized world. So in this condition, I was wondering, how can we create strong democracies that are inclusive of the youth? And I saw two different components. First of all, we have to guarantee a true, safe and strong civic space where the freedom of expression is guaranteed and where non-state actors, civil society, NGOs can speak out and have the power to bring change, where there are no barriers for engagement. Because otherwise, as democracy backslides, the civic space is shrinking. It's a vicious circle. So we have to be mindful of both of them at the same time. So what do we have to do? We have to fight. We have to fight to safeguard and to promote democracy everywhere, because it will not save itself, and we have to fight for real. We have to fight against all that brings discrimination and all that threatens democracy. The rule of law must prevail where it is threatened. Human rights must be respected everywhere on the continent, for all the citizens, the younger ones and the less young ones, all age groups. It's an effort. It's a responsibility, actually, and it's a collective responsibility. It's a transgenerational responsibility that we have. I am kind enough to say we, but I believe it is the responsibility of member states, first and foremost, to ensure that this will be happening. Civil society can do so much, but then we need to have the normative power also taking action, strong actions on the topic. I can give you an example. There are countries where organizations that are supposed to democratically represent the youth are under the influence of the state. Countries where their finances are conditional to the good conduct of those organizations, where they don't have a free hand on who is standing for elections internally. Meaning that they are not free to say what they think. Meaning that criticism is forbidden, including in some Council of Europe members. Unfortunately, we are not shielded from these encroachments on democracy. So to protect these youth organizations, we have to maintain and increase the funding for them, such as via, for instance, the European Youth Foundation, because it guarantees the independence of these youth organizations, and because it allows them to thrive. And perhaps sometimes this is unfortunately seen as anecdotal, but you can never dissociate building a strong, safe and healthy democracy on one hand, and on the other hand, the independence of civil society and especially strong youth organizations. Once this first criterion has been met, it's the very development of public policies that needs to change. This is my second component. We need to change the method. Young people are citizens like any other age group. And as an FYI, we are actually living the longest with the consequences of any decision, of all decisions ever taken at the political level. So this is why, for instance, as the European Youth Forum, as representatives of the youth, we are calling for the youth test. Earlier, Jean-Luc, you talked about improving existing tools. The youth test is going into that way. In the 12th stage of every new policy, the youth test would be to carry out an evaluation to make sure that the policy has consequences on youth, whether positive or negative, and if negative, we would be managing them and correcting the situation. We are calling for this at EU level, but it's also a very powerful tool at national level and local level, and it could also be used within the Council of Europe, so as to ensure that policies are inclusive of the youth and that it makes them better. Because let's be honest, the youth test is a very simple tool. It's very simple to implement. It's a lesser effort, really. But it's with such an important consequence, because otherwise, what should we, as the youth, or as states, as citizens, what should we think of states or organizations that develop policies that do not meet the needs of all of their citizens? To conclude, as long as public policies are not relevant for youth, and as long as youth organizations are not fully independent, as long as there is no civic space to guarantee participation in public life, we will not progress. So let's move forward together. I seriously and deeply believe that there is a desirable future in which our democracies are strong with their youth and through their youth in all of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elias, for your contribution. I just remember no or low barriers for engagement, especially for youth engagement, defending our principles of democracy, human rights, and rule of law, and the youth sticks to it, and the youth organizations stick with these principles. And your claim for independent youth organizations and the interesting call for a youth test are remarkable positions. And I just will have a question maybe later on, but maybe you noticed that. How do we have several policy tests already, and how will we deal with it when the goals or the aims are not in alliance with them? But maybe you can give an answer to this different interests. And now we have the honor to hear the statement of Mr. Remingus Sepial. He told me that his first name is a little bit difficult to speak out, so he is okay with Remy, he told me. He is the Congress Youth Delegate, and he will speak to us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to be here as a representative of youth delegates. I'm filled with profound sense of duty and gratitude for adding the youth dimension to this conference. Thanks to Rejuvenating Politics initiative implemented by the Congress in 2014 as a part of its commitment to promoting the participation of young people in public life. Indeed, the fact that I'm here talking to you is a compelling illustration of how youth engagement and construction of robust and inclusive democracies should look like. Have you ever wondered what our democracies would look like if we fully embraced the ideas and energy of young people? Would it be thriving because all citizens would actively participate in the political process? Would it ensure more vibrant, responsible, and representative democracy? Would it be more inclusive because all individuals, regardless of their background, identity, or circumstances, would have equal opportunity and access to the democratic process? Certainly yes, because those are the core values shared by young people. From Portugal to Azerbaijan, from Iceland to Turkey, young people are taking action, calling for governments and local or regional authorities to respond to the issues they truly care about, from climate justice, education, sustainable development, to political participation. This collective energy and engagement of young people makes them a powerful force in driving change for stronger democracy. However, I'm aware, and therefore I'm calling you to bear in mind that no one is born a good citizen, and no nation is born a democracy. And no democracy exists without young, passionate citizens with a strong desire to make a positive impact on the world. We can agree that democracy itself is always under construction, and this implies that there's always room for the improvement, and it is crucial to reserve this room for the people with energy and enthusiasm, for the people with fresh perspective, and for the people with long-term stake in the future, for the young people. The question is, how do we set up this energy and transform it into something meaningful? The potential for change that resides within young people can be enhanced through creation of opportunities. So it is essential to provide young people with possibility to effectively articulate their messages. And as the local and regional authorities have the advantage of being the closest to the citizens, they can directly equip young people with knowledge and skills by incorporating, for example, internship or traineeship programs. This will ensure that unique insights and innovative ideas are taken into account. We, as youth, have a vested interest in shaping the future, since we know that we will be living with the consequences of today's decision for a longer time. It is crucial to perceive youth as the stakeholders and as the seeds for a fruitful future. Democracy is often described as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and excluding youth has never been an option. Building strong democracy requires collective efforts. Therefore, let us all learn from each other and strengthen our democracy together, because only by working together can we achieve it. When revised European Charter on the participation of young people in local and regional life was adopted, we collectively agreed on the shared objectives. The commitments made in 2003 in Krakow are still valid, and they can be fulfilled by local and regional authorities. I believe what was promised in Krakow, Reykjavik should implement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Remy, for your call on this declaration and to implement the youth and to take them serious. And I've heard that, I think, a very important thing, that no one is born as a good citizen. We have to learn to respect democratic values and to deal with democracy. And that youth is a very important stakeholder in this process, as you mentioned. Thank you very much for your contribution. And I would like to open and invite to open the floor now to the audience to put questions to the speakers or to share their own insights and reflections. And I'm asking now especially to the audience in the first floor, is there any question you would like to put? Yes, please. Maybe you just say your name, and there should be a microphone around, and you can give the question. And maybe if you want to address the question to one of the panelists, please tell us. And I will repeat your question that the people who are online with us, that they can understand and hear your question.
Hello, my name is Friðmey, and I'm the CEO for Samfish, which is an umbrella organization for all the youth clubs and youth houses in Iceland. My question is maybe for Bergholtz. How can we make sure that the ideas and the voices of the youth are taken into considerations before discussion makings? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I hope I just got it right. How can we make sure that the ideas of the youth are taken seriously into consideration in decision making? And the question, did you, Alice, would you like to respond to this?
It's a very complicated mic system. Yes, thank you so much for the question. And I think that the important thing to understand when we look at how decision-making is practiced is that it's basically structured in a way that's, you know, this is how we did it before, and then we're doing it again, and then we're doing it again. But to make sure that the setting is youth-friendly, I think there are a couple of things you can do, right? So one thing is to actually look at, okay, where can we meet the young people? And I was actually speaking to a municipality in Sweden a couple of weeks ago about this, where they realized that they had an open house for youth, but they accidentally scheduled it on a school day. Yeah, so they couldn't join. And then they had to reschedule and find a better time, and then it worked. But honestly, the co-management system, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. And the advisory council where I'm sitting, we're 30 young people from all over Europe. Half of us are elected through the European Youth Forum, so on the mandate of the youth organizations in Europe. And the other group is selected from the list of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe. And I think this is a beautiful model of both having young people actually giving mandate by voting on youth representatives, and secondly, to complement that list, to see what perspectives are missing, because the work of the Council of Europe is huge. So to make sure that the Advisory Council actually can contribute to the whole of the organization, the selection process is crucial, where we get in perspectives from minority organizations, can be on specific topics, like artificial intelligence is a huge one right now. And the co-management system also works in a way where young people are given equal mandate as government representatives. So we all take our decisions on consensus. That means that the process is painfully slow, but at the same time, we have equal rights and equal mandate. And this is something it's happening nowhere else. This structure is absolutely unique for the Council of Europe, and I know that there have been local and regional levels trying to implement similar ones. And this is definitely a call to encourage everyone here to also see where more it can be implemented. Because with a track record of over 50 years in the Council of Europe, we know that it is sustainable, it's reality-based, and it's really close to what young people want to bring up themselves, because we are both advocates, but we're also consultants, definitely. Yeah, I hope that answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice, for your answer. Are there any additional remarks from the panelists? Please, Elias, and maybe you can put a sentence on the question I put on you before with dealing with the results of youth tests. I think this would work quite well together. Yes? The question, how can we make sure that ideas of youth are taken seriously into consideration? And my question is, when there are youth tests being done, and there are several other policy tests we are doing already in practical policy, and if they are not going into the same direction with their results, how can we deal with situations like this so that the youth will kind of understand the decision-making process? When it goes along, it's quite easy, of course.
Thank you. Actually, I will be answering both questions at the same time because I think the topic is the same for both. Huh? How can we make sure that the decision-making processes are also including of the youth? Well, first, obviously, the decision-makers have to be young people as well. We need to have youth in politics, and I think this is a lot of what Alice covered in her intervention. But second, at the technical level, there are many things that we can do as well, which is why we have the youth test. So maybe I can take some more time to explain to you what we want to do with the youth test. There are three main steps in the youth test that make sure that policies are fit for the youth. The first step is meaningful engagement with youth organizations. So when drafting a policy on any topic, the policymakers, either the elected individuals or the administration in the case, for instance, of the EU, where we are working on the youth test quite a lot. We want to have meaningful engagement. That means consultations, rounds of consultations with young people, and especially with organized young people, with the democratic representations of young people. So youth organizations, whether national or international, but we need to have these consultations. And they need to happen physically or they need to happen online, but not just a few written texts. It needs to be a discussion between the policymakers on the one hand and the youth on the other hand. So that's the first step. The second is the impact assessment. So we have a certain number of criteria and we cross-check them. We see what will be the impacts on this topic and on this topic and on this topic impacting the youth. Not just for youth policies again, but for all kinds of new policies. Because it's very important that not just youth policies have a youth perspective. We need to have the youth perspective in every policy, especially policies on, I don't know, climate, finance, labor. All of these, they have an immediate impact on the youth, and very often they are not so fit for the youth. And the third step would be the mitigation measures. If we find out that there are some negative impacts, if we find out that there are, how do we say again in economy, negative externalities, yeah, on the youth, then we need to mitigate them. And that would be the youth test. And all of this before the policy enters into practice. So when it enters into practice, we can evaluate already its impact on the youth, but we've put steps before to make sure that it is more fit. How does it work with other different policy tests? I have to say this is a very practical question. Huh? We at the Youth Forum, we've been working on how the youth test can work at the level of the EU. We have not yet developed how it could be working at the level of the Council of Europe, but we've received hints from within that it would be interesting. So perhaps, probably not this year. I think it's a matter of what do we do with the different outcomes of those policy tests, right? With the understanding that the youth test secures that the policy that we are drafting and then implementing, I'm saying we, but the institutions or the governments are drafting and then implementing, it secures that it is fit for the youth, meaning for the youth right now, but also for the future generations of young people. Not the future generations who will grow up and so on. In 10 years, there will also be young people, and the policy needs also to be fit for them. So this is the idea that we have with the youth test, and also how youth can be involved in the decision-making processes. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elias. I think there are some amendments from our older panelists, and I think it will be very interesting to hear some sentences about them. And maybe there is, I see another question in the audience, then we will have a last round with this question. Please, Peter, are you going to be first?
Yes, thank you. Well, the issue of involvement of the youth is also very important for the border regions, which I represent today. And of course, the way the people view to borders is very different from my generation, the new generation. My generation is foremost wondering about the steps already taken, but the new generation feel the need for ongoing changes. And we are developing, as Association of European Border Regions, a program called IV, that means the Interreg Volunteer Youth. And we are starting to form youth groups around in border regions to think about borderless regions. And well, that's a way, a tool to make the involvement of the youth more on that subject.
Thank you, Peter van Hoog, and now Jean-Luc Van Rijs.
Thank you. So I'm actually quite much interested in this youth test ideas, and it's a very good idea. And I try to translate into local level. So many communes in my country, but also in others, I suppose, have what we call a youth council in every city. And normally what's happening for the moment is that there is 3-4 times a year this gathering of this youth council together with people who are elected, and some members are younger, so that's good too. The only remark I have on this is that when you speak on local level, most of the time decisions must be taken quickly. And therefore, I would ask you, or I would propose to you, to create this kind of discussing, but knowing that we don't have months of discussion, because participative democracy is very important, and I'm the first defender of it, but it should not delay decision-making. And therefore, I think if you make your proposal, it would be very nice to say that you accompany the urgent decisions also, as they say in law terms, by privilege, so quickly. Because it's very important. And then another thing is that many of the decisions made have, of course, long-term financial consequences for your generation. You decide to hire somebody in a certain job, well, you will have to pay the pension of that person for many years. So, so that's one of the older participants to city councils are always thinking about this, and it's very important for you. But this implements too that this could quite change very much actual decision making. And sometimes people could say to the youngsters, well, you make our life impossible because you say it's not good for your future. So, you know, and it's a good thing. There will be some discussions about this, but we have to avoid conflict of generations, and therefore it's necessary to be well informed at the beginning. And so I'm quite a supporter of your idea, but it needs some thinking to be practical and useful in short term.
Thank you very much. I think we could have a discussion on this topic for another hour, but we are running out of time, and I want to give a chance for the question from the audience, and maybe we can put a last sentence on this topic. Please. Please, loud again that I can repeat the question for the audience online.
Hello, my name is Odin. I come here from the Youth Council of Hafnarfjörður, and I wanted to ask what advice would you give someone who wanted to get involved with society as from the youth, how the youth can get involved in society?
Thank you. The question, if I understood it right, is what advice can the panelists give to a young person who wants to get involved into youth politics and to engage in local politics? Did I translate this kind of right? Okay. Who wants to answer? Maybe our youth delegate and maybe then an older member of the panelists, then because we have the experience and we have the insight of the youth then in the answer.
Well, thank you for this question. I will say from my perspective how it started for me. I undergone the internship in Polish embassy in India. I applied for it, and they gave me the opportunity to be involved in planning, implementation, and monitoring the policies which were taken in India. And this activism can be achieved through internship programs. It simply can empower youth with full autonomy and raise the awareness of the political process. Like, simply, they showed me how it works, and they gave me the opportunity to practice it. That would be my advice, to try to look for the internships within the political assemblies, within the government institutions. That's like a trampoline for the future career and future involvement.
Thank you. Anybody wishes to add? Please, Peter.
Well, I would say, and just start. I was only 17 years old when I made my first steps into politics. I did it with the idea that nobody was interested and probably nobody would listen, and then I started and I experienced that my vision was welcome. And of course, changes do not happen overnight. It takes time, and you are a part of a decision-making which looks at the I forgot the English word, sorry. It takes time, so it needs patience, but just start, even when you are young.
Thank you. Maybe I would just add that, as we heard from the minister today already in the morning, just take the floor, take the word, and be able or be interested and engaged, maybe not also always on the political level that we think that this is the high politics and so on. So you can also take the floor in your club, in a cultural club, in a sportive club, take responsibility there, and you will get the trust and be entrusted later on by other people that they force you into politics. Maybe this is a way to kind of get towards politics. And now there is one last question. I think we can have one last question from the audience, please.
Hi, my name is Árni and I'm in the Youth Council in Hafnarfjörður. We are working on a project with the Youth Council in Hafnarfjörður, and we are trying to find ways to get more diverse young people, like young people with other origins and people with disabilities, to participate and have opinions on the subject that surround the young people like them, and have opinions that benefit the youth like themselves in the town.
It wasn't that easy to understand the question fully, but I hope I translated like kind of the census is how can we engage young people with disabilities to participate in politics by themselves and not just for them? Did I understand or translate your question right?
Yeah, get more diverse people to participate in the Youth Council.
Yes, and to motivate these people in the youth convent. Does anyone has an idea or want to give an idea, an input? Please, Alice.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's a really good question, and it also is extremely relevant in how we look at when we create structures for young people to participate or to gather, who is actually there, right? I come from a background with working with the disability movement too, and I would say that sometimes it is the stupidest things that create hinders for people to actually be able to join. So it could be anything from the weather is bad or the tone is not the right thing. But I think one thing that we are actually in charge of, that we can use, and I'm just going to jump back to the question we started this panel with, because when we phrase things in a certain way, we also say who we expect to be there and to be part of the process, right? So with the starting question, are young people today still demanding the same changes that we once were? Then the we is obviously not us. So we are not part of them. It's fine, but it says something, right? And I think similar structures can be found if you look at, for example, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, LGBTQ perspectives, or disabilities. And then we all have this responsibility, really, to be able to see that and experience that. Because one thing with different perspectives, I can never understand fully what someone else who has, for example, a disability goes through to be able to participate, but I can learn, and I can try to understand it, and I can listen. So I think you will help me, and we will together also take that responsibility on our own and see where we can create better structures.
Thank you very much for this answer, a very good answer in my point of view, and Jean-Luc wants to add.
Just shortly, there is one new tool that didn't exist 30 years ago, that's this one. And this creates the possibility of taking a threshold that existed before on all levels. So sometimes, it was another question there, if you don't dare to participate in a meeting, you're a bit too shy, or there can be many reasons for that. The fact that now you can use a Teams meeting or Zoom meeting could help you taking the first step. And I think this could be one of the good tools that didn't exist before to create a more inclusive discussion.
Thank you. And one last type of answer from Elias, and then we have to close the panel because we are running out of time. Please, Elias.
What a privilege. No, I will change hats very briefly. I am the former president of the European Union of Jewish Students, right? The Federation for 36 Jewish students' unions in their countries. So I've had my fair share of inclusion, but actually we never have enough of inclusion. In my experience, there are things that we can do to be more inclusive that are quite easy. First, reaching out to the people we don't know with the humility that we are willing to learn. And so that's the second step, learning what you can do to be more inclusive and learning firsthand from the people who you want to include or from the people who are experts on the topics. And the third step is to evaluate how that has been happening. But you need to be ready to hear things about your organization, about your structure that you are probably not going to appreciate. It's not an easy process, right? It's a tough process to realize that you have barriers for engagement within your own organization, but it's a healthy process, which is why it's tough. And that was my only point on inclusion. And just because you mentioned the youth test earlier, I'm coming back. There are 3 countries who are implementing it: France, Germany, Austria, and one region that is leading also its implementation at EU level, that is Flanders. That is working quite well. And on the practicalities, we have a guiding framework, so I'm happy to send that to you. And before I close the mic, once again, I want very sincerely to thank the Congress for inviting us, the youth, and really for seeing us as stakeholders, not as beneficiaries. because this is quite important for the future of policymaking, for the present as well. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much.
Thank you for these very, very good closing words, and there is nothing to add anymore from my side. So we can close our session number 2, and I think there will be the concluding session following right up. Thank you very much.
Before I say a few words, just for practicalities, at the end of this concluding session, we will sign the, well, you will sign the call for action. So please don't leave after the concluding session. All the representatives of the various organizations and institutions present today will be in the front row and sign the call for action before we do the family picture in this very room. I will not try to sum up the very wealthy discussions that took place this morning, but maybe just to talk about the spirit of the morning. And I thought it was very encouraging to see that we are all on the same line. All the organizations which spoke today spoke of their wish to be always more active in the promotion and protection of human rights and democracy. And this is actually quite useful on the eve of the summit, because during the negotiations leading to this summit, what came out of the member states' discussion was that they didn't necessarily want to create within the Council of Europe new institutions, new bodies to promote democracy, the rule of law and human rights. And we've been saying throughout the process of the negotiations, well, use us. We are here, use the youth organizations within the Council of Europe, use the Congress, use the Parliamentary Assembly. We are here to help. And this message has, I believe, come at the right time. And from what I hear, it's very reassuring because, as always, local and regional authorities are willing to do more, and youth organizations as well. I'm now very happy to give the floor to our co-organizer, the Icelandic Association of Local Authorities, Ms. Hilmi, oh, of course I knew I wouldn't manage, Ms. Hilmisdóttir, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. All presidents and vice presidents and all you important people who are here and you young people up there, we are really happy to be able to co-host this event. We think it's really important. We think that the role of the Council of Europe as a guardian of human rights and democratic values has never been more important than actually now. And I think we need to acknowledge it. And we all need to do it, and we also have to go out and advocate for it. So that's why the Reykjavik Summit is so timely and important, and we thought also it was important to have this meeting together. It is, of course, strange that we have this war going on in Europe, something that we thought was unthinkable just some months ago. And it's become clear to us how vital it is to strengthen our bonds and work stronger together, and about our common goal and common values that we have in Europe. And I think listening this morning to all you representatives from all these associations, major European, local and regional associations and institutions, you're talking about the commitment and contribution to this mission. It has left me a little bit more optimistic actually. I try always to be optimistic, but yeah, I think we are so many that we must achieve, I think. And it's so obvious that all levels of government need to work hand in hand to guard and promote our human rights and democratic values. It's not enough that only the state does it. We are also really important there. And as mentioned this morning, we see backsliding, and we have to stop that, and we have to think about having all the citizens with us, young people, of course, and women and things. We can do many things better ourselves. So I think this conference actually has been extremely important, and it demonstrates our commitment and will of the local and regional authorities to do our bit. And I hope the call for action we are about to sign will make the Council of Europe and our national governments acknowledge the crucial democratic and human rights role of local and regional authorities. We are the providers of everyday service to our inhabitants. We are in close contact with all our inhabitants, and that gives us this unique opportunity to reach out to the citizens and build trust, cohesion, and social responsibility, which are the fundamentals of well-functioning democracy. The pandemic, the refugee situation, and now the war in Ukraine have demonstrated both the will and the capacity of European local and regional authorities to act in times of crisis. And we think, once again, that the national governments need to look at local and regional governments as equals and work with us on basis of multiple level governance. It's furthermore essential that they grant us adequate support so we can fulfill this important task. And I know this is something that we are always discussing, and you are discussing in the Council. We need to be able to do what we have to do because it's important. Both to be able to do this service and also to be this democratic actor. Lastly, I want to stress the importance that the work of the Congress as a representative assembly of European local and regional authorities is acknowledged. I think it's important. And we, the Icelandic Association of Local Authorities and the City of Reykjavik, I sit also here in the City Council every week, we are really happy to host this high-level meeting. It's an honor for us to do so, and we really look forward to the future cooperation with the Congress. And after this fruitful week, which we have decided that will be fruitful, we hope that you will connect Reykjavik to brighter future and progression. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I want to acknowledge and thank you for the role your team has played in making this meeting possible. They've really been great over the last few weeks. Thank you very much. And now the closing word to the President of the Congress.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Bernd and Harold for leading the panel and also the panelists who gave a very interesting insight in what they are working on, what they're doing, and the way their mind works on the topics that we are discussing together. It's a wide variety. We use terms as rule of law, human rights, democracy, but there's much more behind it than only those three small lines. And the variety in itself is also very interesting to hear, because each organization with its objectives adds to these topics. Which, of course, we do as a Congress too. It gave me also the feeling that there's room for improvement in our cooperation. Maybe we should talk to each other a bit more often than only just by incident like we do here now in Reykjavik. I suggest, but we'll have to talk about that. Maybe we should make some kind of tradition that once every year or once every 2 years we organize a kind of a meeting like this to exchange knowledge, to exchange information, learn from each other, because I learn a lot from you, just by the way you talk and the way you think about these topics. We've seen many examples how you do that, and that motivates a lot. Concerning the youth also, we saw some examples how we introduce the youth in the work that we're doing. It's my own experience. We shouldn't tell the youth it's easy, because it's not. To enter the process of becoming part of these debates is quite a tough job that you have to do, and we have to realize that, and we have to be honest about it, and we must be open. And I invite the youth, if I look back to my own youth, a little stubbornness and a little arrogance does help a lot. Of course, you have to listen to other people, but don't do it always. Because we all did the same. As some of you said, we all were young someday, and we recognize very much the struggle that's needed to enter this world. But it gives me all together, and it's not only the organizations and those of you who are sitting here in the room. I understood from the ICT people altogether we're about 150 people in this meeting, including the ones on the internet. We are representatives of a much larger group, not only organizations, but truly also the citizens, including the youth. We are really a very big family. I like to say this in our own Congress too. We have to realize we are a family. We have the same objectives. We may have our varieties, but we have the same objectives. And we should stick to each other. We need to show solidarity in these complex times, because the things that we are working for, the things that we aim to realize, will be working matters for years. It's not something to do in 2 or 3 years. Looking to the situation in Ukraine, some of you referred to that. I came back from Ukraine 3 weeks ago. I've been there several times during the war period, and 3 weeks ago we achieved an agreement with the authorities in Ukraine to work on a roadmap in development of local and regional authorities. This is not just a sentence on a paper, because in Ukraine's situation, the situation of war, the struggle of the Soviet past, gives lots of tensions between local authorities, regional authorities, national authorities, and the army in this situation of war. Some of the mayors I spoke were wondering if the army will go back to the barracks after the war. They were not so sure about that. So we have to support them in this, and that approach of a roadmap will really work, and we will put much effort in that to do that. But it's not only in Ukraine. We see in many of our other member states the need for roadmaps, for planning. How do you do this kind of organization? How do you develop local and regional authorities? It's my own experience that you have to think through very thoroughly what's the order of things. Don't start at the end, but start at the beginning. Too many projects try to start to realize objectives at the end, but then you won't manage. You have to start at the beginning. And what's the right order of things to do a program and develop topics? I spoke with people also in Ukraine, for instance, about what is corruption. Members of city councils said, we didn't really know what it was. You had to explain us, because it's so much in the roots of our society that we were not realizing this is not a good thing. And I've seen this in many other countries too, also in member states of the Council of Europe. People are struggling at local councils about the values that we try to defend. And at the same time, there is an important cultural side to it too. I often say democracy in the Netherlands, where I come from, has a cultural side that it can't be copied just like that, because the democracy in Italy or in Great Britain or in Sweden has a cultural side to it too. So we must give each other also some room to maneuver, but in the basics, we know what democracy is about. And I would like to invite you, and we'll talk about that, how we should continue this. I think this should not be an incident. Now, in a few moments, we were going to sign the call for action, and I think what the call for action describes is the intention that we debated about today. We are going to put a signature under it, what we already said, so it won't be too hard for you to sign it, I think, because we make promises to each other that this is what we want to achieve, this is what we want to do together, not only by our own, with our own organization, but as a big family, to sign together this call for action. And my suggestion, I'll continue saying that, let's do this again, because I think it's worthwhile. Thank you.
We will now do the signature of the call for action. And I also want to thank the many people who followed us online. Thank you for following us. And if you want to follow the summit, you have the link to the summit streaming on the Council of Europe website. Thank you for joining us online.
Apparemment, lui, il a plus d'expérience, il est de la maison. It's better here, apparently. Yeah.